Hi, welcome to Last Week in Local for the 4th of November. Election day is tomorrow, at least here, and hopefully you'll go out and vote. I was going to do early voting this year, which they have in New York, and somehow that got away from me. So maybe hopefully I'll make it to the polls. And we had our first couple snowstorms here. So we're catching up with, winter is coming, we're catching up with you. And I made my, although one of the things, in Game of Thrones that they never talked about was the types of food they might eat during the winter that they didn't eat the rest of the year. For me, that's lentil soup and split pea soup. And I made my first bowl of split pea soup yesterday, and it's delicious. My first pot of it. So, anyways, I thought I'd kick off with this acquisition by Google of Fitbit, which I found very fascinating. I think there's nothing more local, nothing more personal than exercise. In fact, I think it was a year ago, they were talking about how some of the Fitbit information from the military in secret locations was sneaking out for people to see where they were running. There's nothing more private and more local than this information. I thought it was interesting they bought them. Daniel Tunkelgang, who is a very sophisticated engineer who used to work at Google, tweeted every bit that's fit to track, right? Just massive amounts of data here. I did note that Fitbit felt compelled in the public relations release to note that they're strong on privacy.
They were.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how long it takes for Google, like with Nest, to change the terms of service, to change the privacy considerations. I was going to buy a Nest for my home at one point, and then Google bought them, and my wife and I decided, we just didn't want Google to knowing, when we were home, when we weren't, when we were walking around, when we weren't. And it feels like that with Fitbit as well.
And my experience is there's a lot of apps out there that do what Fitbit does. And I'm not sure why Google felt that it was worth, $2.5 billion to buy Fitbit when there are so many other apps that can do that same thing.
Well, it's in the context of one, Fitbit being really hard hit by Apple Watch, and their sales declining pretty dramatically. And then Google's Watch OS never really taking off, and I don't know if they weren't committed to it. They didn't put the engineering resources on it. So I don't know if it's as much an acqui-hire as it is a technology hire, or if it's for the user base. I'm not quite sure. It's certainly a good question. At Apple Insider, they said, taking two turkeys and merging them doesn't make an eagle. And that's what Watch OS and Fitbit, Fitbit's on hard times right now. And so the fact they got $2.5 billion is a lot.
Yeah.
And it is a little curious to me.
It's interesting to me. I have a Fitbit. I wear it every day. I wear it every night. And to me, Fitbit is a little bit...
Now Google's going to know when you're exercising too heavily when you should be sleeping.
Yeah. I'll probably be taking it off.
What do I know?
I find it interesting that, Fitbit's on hard times, and, Google's Watch OS didn't take off. They don't have their own product. But they're not going to use the data to target ads, which I think is bullshit. They might not right now, agree. But they will eventually. I don't understand why they bought it then. If they're not going to use the data for advertising or to know how people behave, then I think that's what they're using it for. I think they're using it as a behavioral study. They're going to use all that data about where people go and what order they run their errands in, and how fast they drive and what streets they take, because Fitbit tracks all of that, your route everywhere. So does your phone, of course. But the flip side of that is I have an iPhone. I don't let the Google app work unless I have the app actually open on my phone. And so previously from my iPhone, they didn't know that information. Now, because I have this and it syncs to my iPhone and they have access to the Fitbit data, they know all the stuff that I used to hide from them. So I think that this opens a door to them to data that was maybe previously not really in a black box, but maybe behind a bit of a fuzzy wall, because now they've got access to all that data that was stuck in one of these.
So Tim Cook made an interesting comment at the Apple quarterly financial reports last week, where he said, they were talking about, the moderate decline in iPhone sales and all mobile phones. But he said that going forward, he felt that the thing that Apple will be most remembered for is their impact on health. And I think that one of the reasons here is to acquire sophisticated engineering teams that can build out health-related products to compete with Apple. They know where Apple's going, or they think they know. They have aspirations in that space. I think health is a huge market, and I think this, like many things Google does, there must be some long-term play we're not seeing here, because the short-term play doesn't make any frickin' sense, right? So,
is there a native Android app that works like the health app on an iPhone? I haven't had an Android phone in years, so I don't know.
Well, the whole Watch OS is a huge failure, right? Nobody uses it. It's not very friendly. I mean, they haven't sold hardly any.
Like even in the phone, because
the
health app in my phone works if I don't have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, if I just carry the phone with me, right? So I don't think there's anything comparable for Android.
Don't know what's going to come of it, but it's interesting, and I think it's an interesting intrusion into people's lives and into local. We'll see where it goes. So on other Google news, the Toronto waterfront, which is the project that Google's subsidiary Sidewalk proposed several years ago for Toronto. We've talked about it here before, where they're going to create this totally digital utopia in this space along the waterfront. Got derailed a year ago when Google proposed increasing its size by 10 or 15x and increasing the amount of data collection and way the data would flow to Google by 10 or 15x, raising all sorts of alarms across all the privacy groups, put the project essentially on hold. They're in final negotiations at this point, back to a 12-acre project, and with the government owning the data rather than Google, and then creating certain guarantees that tech companies in Canada will have access to this data, be able to develop products and protect, services that could be delivered within this. So we'll see. It's a Google sort of experimental city where everything is monitored. Cars in, cars out, people walking across the street, sidewalk usage, everything, ground up sensors. So, maybe you don't have a Fitbit, but you may live in Sidewalk or in waterfront Toronto. You won't need one. They'll be able to tell you where they got walking without it. So, interesting.
That's not creepy at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of news this morning about some app made by the Chinese called TikTok, and they're worried about China getting private data through this app. And it's like, why should they bother? They can just buy it from Facebook.
Right. Or any other app that we live with on our phone. What do? TikTok's full of kids making videos of them lip syncing to music and stuff. Who cares? Let them have it.
So some interesting research today out of the University of Buffalo, where they analyzed the impact in New York City. They went to the $15 minimum wage. Obviously, at the time, there was, the Chamber of Commerce and many of the business groups talked about the near-term Armageddon that would result, particularly in the restaurant industry where margins are slim. And what's interesting is that in the restaurant industry, both revenue and employment are up subsequent to the wage. They point out that a wage increase of this magnitude typically would increase a burger price from, say, $10 to $11.20. And there has been virtually no impact. In fact, sales revenue is up, employment's up. They go into some of the reasons why. And it's an interesting report. I just think it speaks to the impact of minimum wage is probably a net economic positive. There will be a few businesses that go under that are very marginal to start with, but that most businesses end up, some combination of ways to mitigate its impact. And in the end, by putting more money in the people's pockets who actually spend it, the net impact on the economy is positive. So I think it's probably time to start talking about $20 minimum wage.
Which the Bank of America was talking about yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, if you live in New York City, how do you live on 15? Like, you can't pay your rent on $15 an hour.
No, even here in rural Western New York, and they didn't give $15 to rural Western New York. Mm-hmm. They've set it at 12, but 15 is like not really enough for a family of 3 or 4 to live on. And even at 30, it's a very marginal, existence for a family of 4 to do that. So I don't know. It's a great question. Interesting article on NPR, one California pie shop's place in the global economy in their marketplace series. And it was interesting because the owner is a very sharp guy. He's opened, I think, 4 of these pie shops. It's called the Pie Hole. Great name. In major cities around the world. And he was speaking about how he views themselves not as a restaurant, not as a food service, but as a hospitality company, and how by Grubhub and Google in helping them and Yelp helping them, inserting themselves in the relationship between them and their customer, they were essentially giving up the one thing that they felt made them unique, which was delivering the customer experience and controlling that experience. And, spoke about the tension between this is where customers are right now wanting this capability and the tension they're feeling internally in terms of giving up that ability to control the customer experience in that context. I just thought it was interesting that it was a sophisticated, thoughtful response to the impact that these types of delivery services are having in the restaurant industry in terms of disrupting customer experience, which is what we've talked about a lot in the past, is so critical moving forward.
Is there a flip side? Oh, go ahead, Mayor.
I was going to say, then they need to do their own delivery. Remember when May Palace, a little Chinese restaurant downtown Glenwood, it changed hands a few years ago, but the lady that owned that restaurant used to do the deliveries herself, so that she could be the one that interacted with her customers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said there, or delivery services that are white labeled that allow the business to define the broad parameters and don't take 35% off the top. I think that what will happen in this industry at some point, those people, the Grubhubs will get a little too grubby, and, I think there'll be a room underneath.
Well, I think they already have. Their stock is tanking, and they're saying it's because of competition from other delivery services.
I wonder if there's a flip side to that, though. So I was reading Twitter last night, and somebody that I follow was complaining because Grubhub had promised her order in an hour, and she still didn't have it. And 2 hours later, she didn't have the order, and Grubhub wouldn't give her an update on when it was going to be there. Through this whole tirade, she did not mention the restaurant once. So is there like a piece of insulation for the restaurants now that if things are late or things don't happen, are people blaming these delivery services versus blaming the restaurant? I mean, is there insulation for them?
There is insulation on the certainly on the review front, but what the restaurant was pointing out was that they lose their direct experience control. In other words, there's an example where this person had a terrible experience. The restaurant, in this case, Pie Hole, would never have put up with that, right? And so that's their worry, is that what they do, which is unique, is this combination of product plus ambiance. And if that's lost, then their positioning is lost. I would suggest to this woman who waited 2 hours, she could have cooked dinner 3 times over, but
Well, I would never. Not like I live somewhere where we have something like that. But
Yeah.
Yeah, Domino's won't even deliver to you.
Nope.
Well, now there's a heartbreaker. Jeez. An interesting piece at blog.mozilla.org. They talk about using their built-in developer tools for auditing accessibility problems. We've talked fair bit about accessibility in the past. Recent lawsuit that with Domino's trying to get more clarity about what the ADA really requires. In terms of website stuff, not going to happen. You have to be compliant, or at least make reasonable efforts in that direction. And this is a set of tools that put it closer to hand, and they're free. So I thought that was interesting. I haven't
Have you tried any of them?
I have not.
Let's all try them and report back.
Yep. And then Google introduced a WordPress plugin. This was a search engine article called SiteKit, which brings data from Search Console, Google Analytics, Page Speed Insights, AdSense, all into one place in WordPress. I thought it was an interesting tool for businesses that are delivering WordPress sites that want to create a sort of single place for the customers to go, that they can see some of the analytics and stuff. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then today at Moz, Miriam wrote a nice article inspired by Carrie's report several weeks ago about a butcher selling meat via a refrigerated vending machine when they were closed. Miriam takes a deep dive into others offering similar vending machines and kiosks, and then explores which retail areas might benefit from the idea of offering up 24/7 delivery of some limited subset of their product. I thought it was a well done, thoughtful article. And if you're consulting with people in the retail space, or you yourself are a retailer, I think it's worth taking a look at and considering how you might be able to expand your service hours without the costs of associated with additional employees.
Well, and not even service hours, but service area. So what's to stop? In her example, it was a bakery, right? Local San Francisco bakery. What's to stop them from putting bread kiosks in surrounding towns and communities? They're all, as long as you pay, deliver, and have a service phone number on it, it's eligible for a Google My Business listing. You could put those, sign agreements with little stores or something and put those vending machines all over the place and have a network of Google My Business listings for your brand if you wanted to invest in it. I think there's a potential there to really expand your service area if you sell a product but can't afford to open stores in all of those locations.
Right. I mean, I know Best Buy does it in every airport, right?
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Mary.
Or if you want to carry products that it doesn't make much sense for you to carry. And you can, like an ATM is an example. Most 7-Elevens are not going to give people cash, but an ATM is something very easy for them to deal with. If you have a product that makes it easier for the marketplace, then you can put it in all different kinds of locations.
Maybe complementary products. So maybe the cheese shop that doesn't have its own bakery or bread would have a bread kiosk out front, or a wine shop would have a bread kiosk out front or something. You could make partnerships within your kind of local complementary product community. It makes a lot of sense, because if I can go to one spot, the wine shop's usually probably open later than a regular little grocery shop would be. I can grab a bottle of wine and get a loaf of bread out front. I can go home, right? And I'm done. So I think it's an interesting opportunity in the local market. And from a local kind of SEO, local search standpoint, you can see a lot of benefits to it. You would just have to really commit to quality product as far as the kiosk goes, like the vending machine goes, because you don't want them to break. You don't want it to be a pain in the ass, right? And then, trustworthy neighborhoods to put them, because what if somebody breaks in and steals all your bread? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, like that's when I read her San Francisco example, I thought, which neighborhood in San Francisco would this bread machine go that was trustworthy and had safety on the streets and didn't have homeless people lined up from one end to the other? I didn't, it's like, I don't know. But certainly, I think it'll be an interesting area to watch. And like opening a new office, it's an expansion that I think is in the reach of many small businesses, and I think it has potential. And then finally, for me, last article. This was first spotted on Twitter and then reported by Barry Schwartz at SEO Roundtable that Google My Business is testing messaging that allows the business or the consumer to add photos in the back and forth. Or it was from the business to the consumer. I don't know about the consumer side yet. But Google, in this transition from SMS to GMB messaging, noted that they want a richer experience, and this is sort of the beginning of that. So things like links and interactive imagery and training materials, all that sort of stuff. On a related note, this is a forum thread, which I didn't put the link to, but apparently Google has, and not apparently, they have, quote unquote, updated the GMB app on your phones to work with the location groups to some extent. But now, instead of it defaulting to the ungrouped group in your GMB, it defaults to the biggest group in your GMB, but only shows the first 100 listings. So all of a sudden, the GMB app, which I was using for all of my small independent people that I would keep an eye on, is now servicing 100 physicians from this count out of 2,000 that I consult with that I couldn't care less about. And there's no way to use the app to navigate back to where I wanted to be to see the stats I want to look at.
So it's worthless. Like, it's a brick.
At least temporarily, it's bricked. Yep. I have to remember to add that link. So over to you guys.
All right. So at Sterling Sky, there's an article by Jan Gilbert about turning off Google My Business reviews. And the short answer is no, you can't do it. The long answer is Mike's figured out a way to do it.
As I told you in the pre-talk, I had a very strange customer contact me, client, who wanted to not even be listed on Google. And, I queried why and everything. And it turned out he was in a high value, very small physical commodity business. And he was worried that people would stalk him and rob him. And so we temporarily, at least, converted his business to an online only business, and then went to Google and said, oh, they're online only. They shouldn't have a listing, and they got their listing taken away. Once they were done, he switched his website back, and he's now without a Google listing. So if you're really desperate, I will tell Mary and Carrie how to do this. Contact us.
No, don't contact us. Then on Twitter and Search Engine Journal, Search Engine Roundtable, Lily Ray did a survey of over 1,000 SEOs asking them if they've bought a link in the last 5 years. And the stats themselves are split right down the middle. But in the pre-talk, we were all laughing about how this really depends on what your interpretation of buying a link is. You might just see what you're doing as effective local marketing and not buying a link.
I just think it was 50% of people were truthful, honestly. Like, I'm sorry, but most links are some sort of a trade, some sort of a commoditized trade of something for something, right? Maybe it's not cash. Maybe I didn't give you my credit card number and you gave me a link, but I think, it could be what's your definition of buy, but I just think,
yes.
Okay.
Then there's an article at Social Media Today where it talks about how the FTC ruled that selling followers, like followers on Facebook and Twitter and likes, is illegal, along with fake reviews. And as soon as I read that, I immediately went to Google and searched for buy Twitter followers, and found that Google not only enables businesses doing this to rank organically, but it makes money from them with its advertising. People are actually advertising on Google that they do something That is illegal, and Google's not doing anything about it. And then lastly, this only applies to multi-location.
Hold it, Mary. So let's see, Google, you're saying Google's allowing people to do something illegal and they're not doing anything about it. Please don't hold your breath on that thought, because you will turn blue. It'll be the end of you.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right. It's not the first time. It probably won't be the last time.
Definitely not.
And then this only applies to multi-location businesses as far as I can tell. But they are allowed to rebrand, meaning come up with a new name, as long as the name is just a minor change in the name. If it goes beyond that, Google is saying that they consider it an entirely new business. So this is something you should probably check into if you have a multi-location brand, especially one that uses multiple business names, I would think. And that's what I have for today. Carrie?
That's interesting, because if you rebrand then and they consider it a new business, that means that you lose all of your old reviews, history,
everything. Yeah.
Entity
start
associations,
all over.
all that. You start all over again, which could be a blessing or could be a pain in the ass.
There you go. It's one way to get rid of your reviews, right?
So there was an article on Search Engine Land talking about Google Maps incognito mode, which we've talked about before. This article kind of talks about what does it mean for businesses. And my reaction to this was, well, for most businesses, their consumers aren't savvy enough to use an incognito maps browser versus just regular maps. So I felt sort of meh about it. Like, okay, whatever, cool. I'm wondering if it's going to make any difference in the data we see. I kind of think no. I'm kind of on the side. Not sure that's news, to be honest. Brittany Mueller wrote an article over at Moz about featured snippets, and she kind of did this fun Q&A, choose your own adventure, kind of answering a bunch of questions. But it's really some great information, and I've had some really good luck with FAQ schema and really sucking up real estate for not only branded queries, but keyword, informational discovery queries. So I think it's definitely worth looking into for local businesses as well as national businesses. One of my very good friends, Aaron Jones, and I have started a new podcast we call the Community Karma Podcast, where we talk about branding and community building. And the episode we posted on Friday was all about how to ask for reviews, which I think has some really great tactics in it and information. I'd really encourage anybody who's trying to create or expand their review program to have a listen. This Friday, we're going to talk about responding to reviews. So kind of a little review series within the podcast, as it were. There was a tweet from Valentin Pletzer where he showed some screenshots of an image carousel and local results, which I thought was interesting. So it's like the maps listing result, instead of one little picture next to it, it was like a carousel of images next to it, all related to the query, as far as I could tell. I can't recreate it. Mike, have you seen this yet? Or?
I have not. No, it looked really busy, and unpleasant. I tried to get it. A lot of times if you try different browsers, different devices, different logins, sometimes developer tools in Chrome, you can get it, but I could not get it to show. So clearly it's one of the, we saw a lot of tests earlier in the fall. I haven't seen this one, but it looked pretty busy.
It looked busy, but it felt to me like another thing that Google's trying to do to train people to swipe. I think that they've not been as successful with that, the left to right kind of results and getting people to swipe through them. That's a gut feeling. I don't have any data to back that up, but I wonder if this is just another way for them to try and train people to swipe at a listing instead of scroll. I don't know. It's kind of what it felt like to me, but you're right. It is really busy. It's a lot of stuff in there that I think takes away from the listing itself. If they want people to not look at stars, this is a good way to do it, because there's lots of stuff there. There's an interesting post from Dana Di Tommaso of Kickpoint where she was talking about a client that They had just moved to new hosting, from fairly pokey hosting to really fast hosting. Zippy is what she called it, hosting. That's the only change they made to the website, to the marketing, anything. And she saw their conversion rate increase 28% just from having a faster website. And that kind of ties into an article from Search Engine Roundtable where Barry's talking about Google Search Console has added new page speed reports to the Search Console. So I think this is another one of those cases where for a long time Google has said, pay attention to page speed, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And now they've given us a very good report within Search Console. I think it needs to populate a little bit. Marie Haynes said it was not quite accurate yet. But I think they're kind of pushing us into the, okay, we've been telling you for a long time to pay attention. Now here's some really solid data on why you should pay attention, or solid information for you to use to pay attention. Is the next step it as a stronger ranking factor? I don't know. That's speculation on my part. I don't know the answer to that for sure. But as Mike pointed out in the pre-talk, the nice thing about the new report is that you can look at it on a page by page. Oh no, as on a whole site basis versus a page by page basis, which most other tools just analyze one URL at a time, right? Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see kind of what that report evolves into being, and how we have to evolve and use it to help ourselves. And the last thing I have is WhiteSpark posted that they've added some new features to their rank tracker program, which is already very robust when you compare it to the other rank trackers. But then they also have added screenshots, which I think is great, because that visual graphical aid to add to reports and to show clients is so important, because sometimes a client will say, well, I don't see that, and sometimes I can't recreate it, especially for local results, because even if I use a proxy and use a VPN and try and pretend that I'm in their location, I don't see the same exact thing they do. So having those screenshots really is helpful in my book from an agency standpoint. And that's what I got.
There you go. Well, great week for Last Week in Local. We'll be here next week. Yeah, it's the week. I think it's the week after I'm traveling, and then I have some vacation time. So next week I'm really working, or the week after, Mary, I'm really working. I'm not.
You don't have to really work for me, Mike.
I'm just telling you. I'm just comparing myself to your somewhat leisurely schedule of late. That's all.
You're just jealous.
We're going to give you so much crap when you're not here, when you're in Thailand, Mike.
You're totally entitled to do so.
Mike is not working today. He's riding his bicycle and eating weird food.
with my wife and children. And I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing than that. So, all right. Well, anyways, thank you for joining us for Last Week in Local. We hope that you join us next week. If you are interested in the links for this article and you're listening to the podcast, you can sign up for our newsletter, or you can see these links on the website. If you want to see our faces for some ungodly reason, the video will be on the website as well. So thank you again for joining us. Have a great week with Local.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.